Acts chapter 19 is where we'll be this evening. Acts chapter 19. As Perry was mentioning, if you weren't here this morning, you certainly did miss out on some eye-opening things regarding the congregations in the Ukraine and what's happening there. I realize that not everybody got a chance to speak with Gary afterwards. Sometimes that can be difficult when you have a guest speaker, and with the amount of information and the type of information that he had, a lot of people wanting to talk and whatnot. Maybe you're one who wanted to support him but weren't sure how. That information will be in next week's bulletin, as far as, or I can get with you afterwards, the overseeing congregation that handles all of that. It truly is a wonderful thing. And you might think, well, I can't give a whole lot, maybe $5 or $10 or something. Let me tell you something. In preaching school, as you've heard me mention on more than one occasion, relying solely on the goodwill of congregations and individuals in the brotherhood to support your family as you're going through that work, every dollar counts. And someone who has worked in mission work for any length of time, they know how to stretch that dollar. They know how to put it where it needs to go to be the most effective and what have you. So even if all you can give is something that you'd spend on a venti frappuccino at Starbucks, that'd be fine. That'd be fun, and I'm sure it would do a great work. But Acts chapter 19, give you a couple of moments to get there. I did not hear as many Bibles turning as I was hoping. Okay, I'm still not hearing them, but that's all right then. Maybe I'll just assume that you are on your phone, regardless of what my mother used to teach me about assuming things. Acts chapter 19, though, just something to look at. This idea, what have we sacrificed? What have we given up? Growing up, especially with two older sisters, I didn't want to give up anything. I thought after two older sisters, well, what's mine was mine. I don't want to share it or anything. Not that I was a spoiled kid. I honestly wasn't. We lower middle class growing up, didn't always get whatever we wanted, and a lot of it hand-me-downs, that type of thing. Hand-me-down toys. Okay, let me correct that. I wasn't not wearing my sister's hand-me-down dresses. I just want to be clear, okay? But you understand what it is. You have something that's yours. You don't want to give it up, especially if you're not getting anything in return. That's just human nature. So I thought we might read together Acts chapter 19, these 8 verses, beginning in verse 11. So Acts chapter 19, beginning in verse 11, and God was doing extraordinary miracles by the hands of Paul, so that cloths and aprons were even carried from his body to the sick, and the diseases left them, and the evil spirits went out. So just pause real quick. That right there is the power of God. And the power of Paul being an apostle, and how close he was to God, and the type of apostolic authority that he had through the Spirit, that very much like Christ, people could take a cloth that he had handled and take it to a sick one, a sick loved one or a friend, and that person would be healed just by touching the cloth that had been held by Paul. You remember Christ walking through the crowd and the woman grabbing his garment and was healed. You just think of that. But verse 13, but also some of the Jewish exorcists who went from place to place attempted to invoke over those who had the evil spirits the name of the Lord Jesus, saying, I implore you by Jesus, whom Paul preaches. That's kind of interesting that you have these Judaic exorcists, people who were not Christians, and yet they saw the works that Paul was doing, and so they tried to invoke the name of Christ, whom Paul preaches. Now 7 sons of one named Sceva, a Jewish chief priest, were doing this. And the evil spirit answered and said to them, I recognize Jesus, and I know about Paul, but who are you? And the man in whom was the evil spirit leaped on them, subdued all of them, and utterly prevailed against them, so that they fled out of that house naked and wounded. And this became known to all, both Jews and Greeks who lived in Ephesus, and fear fell upon all of them, and the name of the Lord Jesus was being magnified. Also, many of those who had believed kept coming, confessing and disclosing their practices. And many of those who practiced magic brought their books together and were burning them in the sight of everyone. And they counted up the price of them and found it at 50,000 pieces of silver. So the word of the Lord was growing mightily and prevailing. There's a lot going on here in Ephesus, talking about the authority of God through God's people. Now, just to be clear, I think everyone here knows and understands we cannot go around casting out demons. That's not us. That's a miracle that is ceased. We know that miracles were there to confirm the word, and that word has been confirmed. As the text tells us, God's word has been delivered once and for all to the saints. But we look at this and, we see there in verse 13 that the evil spirit said, I recognize Jesus. Now, that's not uncommon. We even have in the gospel accounts where the demons would say, Jesus, Son of God. They recognized him. They recognized his authority. But this evil spirit says, I also know God's man. Paul would write to Timothy and he would say, you are God's man. And I don't know if anybody has ever told you that or not, but if they haven't, I want you to know here tonight that as a Christian, male or female, you are God's man. You are God's woman. You need to understand that, and you need to understand too that the devil knows who you are. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean that you are not recognized by the other side, we'll say. But all of these wonderful things are happening, and those people, these so-called religious leaders, even the devil recognizes them as frauds. And the spirit leapt on them and tore them to pieces to the sense that, they ran out of the house in their loincloths and they were wounded, probably physically wounded. It wasn't uncommon at that time for those who were said to be demon possessed would claw at themselves and tear at their own skin and whatnot, or maybe it was just spiritually wounded. Their pride was hurt. And in the midst of everyone there in Ephesus, it says that the news went out to both Jews and Greeks. It went out to both sides, but there's a lot in here. But really what I want us to focus on, and this idea of what have we sacrificed, is there in verse 19. That many people who practiced magic. Now, at the time, we're not talking necessarily David Copperfield type of magic. We're talking genuine evil authority. Now, if you're not sure what I mean by that, you just think back to Moses and how he went to Pharaoh. And remember, those first few miracles, Pharaoh's magicians were able to do them as well. You remember that? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about genuine evil authority. Not, how can I sit here and make a denarii disappear in my hand and pull it out from behind some Jewish kid's ear. We're not talking about that. So these people who practiced genuine evil brought out these books and they started burning them in the sight of everyone. And it says about 50,000 pieces of silver. Now, Paul, here in Ephesus, now we know that the book of Acts, it's the history of the church, the early days of the church, those early years. Here in chapter 19, he's in Ephesus, and he's speaking to both Jew and Gentile. There's Roman citizens there and Roman subjects there. Unfortunately, where it says pieces of silver, we don't know exactly what coin that was. Most tend to believe that it was a Roman denarius. That was minted around 14 AD to 37 AD, and on it was imprinted a picture, if you will, of Tiberius. Again, there's nothing specific saying that it was that coin. Just most commentators looking at that area and it being predominantly Gentile, they kind of go with that. Now, to figure out the value, which is something a little bit more difficult, you have to look at a couple of things. You have to look at the salary of a Roman foot soldier. You need to look at things like the cost of wheat and barley and bread and what have you. And so they equate that a single silver coin, if today inflation and translating over to US dollars, would have about the buying power of $20 for each coin. So you look at that, we've got 50, and we'll just go with that for the sake of argument. So you look at that and you have these 50,000 pieces of silver. Now, if you're quick in your head on math, or you like me, you had to open up the calculator on your phone, you find that on a conservative level, you're looking at about $1 million worth of books. $1 million. Now, if you go with the more liberal side, you're looking at anywhere from $5 to $10 million. Now, that's a lot of money, right? But it's not just that cost. We also have to consider the cost of making the book. See, the books weren't like we have today. They were generally scrolls. And each scroll was about 30 feet long. And we know that from some of the scrolls that have been discovered in the Dead Sea area in Qumran and in other places. So about 30 foot long. And we also have to consider how long it would have taken a scribe to fill that scroll. So when we look at 1 drachma equaling 1 denarii, okay, and how much scrolls cost and what have you, what we're looking at is approximately 12,500 scrolls. Now, that's a lot. One, it tells us how much evil was really in Ephesus, those Jewish exorcists, to have that type of library. Sure, it could have maybe just been a few people, but that would be odd, for that. You go into a preacher's office today, and a lot of the times it's not uncommon to see a couple thousand books in his office, right? But then, they didn't have Jeff Bezos and Amazon or eBay or what have you. So it would have been a little bit pricier, a little bit more difficult. So when we think of the money, it's not just the value themselves, but it's also what went into the production, the paying the other person and what have you. When we also look at that value, we think of the knowledge that they had of being able to, I'll say, perform these evil works. So it's not just the material cost of the book itself, but everything that went into it. Now again, we don't know from this text the exact amount. We don't know the exact dollar amount of the 50,000 pieces of silver. We don't know the exact number of scrolls that were burned. That's just an estimate, but that's also the point, that we don't know the amount. Because really what we're looking at is that they sacrificed. They sacrificed money. The money that went into producing these materials. They sacrificed the money that they earned in performing these feats that were spoken of or that they learned through these materials. There was a loss of income there. You remember Simon the sorcerer? If you don't remember that, is that he heard the gospel, he believed the gospel, but then as soon as he saw the apostles performing these miracles, because Christ had given them apostolic authority, what did he try to do? He tried to buy them. He tried to buy the power of God. But why? Because otherwise he was out of an income. So the value of what was burned up was the income that went into the books, the money there, the knowledge that went into it, the time, the effort. So they were giving all of these things up. They didn't sell them to someone else to try to make a dollar or a denarii. They were just willing to sacrifice it all. And so we come to the question, what have we sacrificed? What do we sacrifice? You know, there's a lot of times when we look at our possessions and we say, well, I don't want to give that up, whatever that is. Maybe it's something that we've held on to for a long time. Or maybe it's a habit that we have. Maybe you are hey, I need to go to Starbucks, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for this particular drink or what have you. Don't get me wrong, I love coffee. Hate Starbucks, but I love coffee. But, that money could always go towards something else. This morning, we heard, for those of you that were here, we heard about the congregations of the Lord's people in the Ukraine, and we think what it is that their sacrifice. I didn't have the opportunity to go to lunch. I know that Rita and Dwayne did. Maybe some others of you were there. I don't know. But I'm sure that what was spoken of was the amount that people have to sacrifice there. We saw slides of homes being completely destroyed, villages burned to the ground, thousands of children, thousands upon thousands of children homeless. You might recall the sacrifice of seeing those 109 strollers that were just out there on the concrete, all of them empty, representing children that had been sacrificed under the I'll just say it, under the whim of a madman. We have brothers and sisters not only in the Ukraine, but we have brothers and sisters in various parts of the African continent who are dealing with Islamic terror groups, where they will come in with machine guns. They will often kill the parents. A lot of the times they will take the young men. And do you happen to know what the first test of that young man is to be a soldier? It's generally to shoot his parents. There's a book that I read several years ago called The Boy Soldier. And that was that very fact. He said the first person I ever killed was my own father. There's a lot of sacrifice going on in the world, and we are so very blessed with what we have. I think the least that we can do is when we go out into the world, and don't get me wrong, I'm not faulting anybody here. It's no one's fault to be born in one place or another. But what I would ask you to consider as you go throughout this week is the question of what if. It's a very simple question. What if instead of being born in the United States, you were born in the Ukraine? What if instead of being born in this wonderful land of freedom that we have, you were born in jungles? What if? How would your life be different? And when you're thinking about that, you might come across the idea and say, well, you know what? I might not even be a Christian. If I were born in the Congo, in a small village that no one has ever heard of and will never hear of, to parents who only a few of us know, I might never know the grace, mercy, and love of God. I would encourage you to hold on to that thought, because there are many born that way every day. As we go out this week to the grocery stores, to work, to wherever, just want to give you 3 words. Be the blessing. That's it. Be the blessing. You can be the blessing to someone else. You can help someone in the state that they are in one way or another. You don't have money, share with them the gospel. You don't have time, give them a tract that we have out there. Give them a card to invite them to services. If you have time, spend some time with them. Be the blessing. Show the person. It's ridiculous, honestly, that people are born in the United States with the type of freedom that we have who still don't know God. That is, to me, inexcusable. They're not in the desert. They're not in some jungle somewhere. They're not in some slum somewhere else. They are here with God's people. We have to do the work. If there's any way at all that we, as your brothers and sisters, can help you in that work, because it doesn't need to be neglected, let us know, and you can do that by coming forward as we stand and as we sing.